She was a forgotten artist, until her work started bleeding. What began as a missing persons case turned into something far darker. Paintings that moved, screamed, remembered. Detective Eli Price followed the brushstrokes into madness, and what he found inside that gallery should have never existed. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Watch closely, but not for too long. Kindly like and subscribe for more. Ashbury Hollow wasn't the kind of place where people vanished. Tucked between old-growth forests and abandoned railway lines, it was a postcard town that still hosted bake sales, closed on Sundays, and smelled like chimney smoke in October. The kind of place where everyone knew your dog's name before they remembered yours. Where you didn't lock your door unless you were out of town, and even then, it was more out of habit than fear. Claire Whitmore changed that. She lived alone in the second-story apartment above the Ashbury Hollow Library. In a flat she'd painted a dreamy shade of robin's egg blue. Locals liked her. She was polite but kept to herself. Her art bold, surreal oil portraits with smeared eyes and melting faces was the talk of small local galleries and edgy online circles. A few called her the next Francis Bacon. Others whispered about her being a bit off. But on October 12, 2023, Claire didn't show up for her meeting with Silas and Dean Gallery in New York City, a career-defining opportunity she talked about for weeks. She was supposed to drop off 7 paintings. Instead, she vanished. The alarm was first raised by Maddie Cross, Claire's best friend and, according to many, her only real confidant in town. "I called her that morning," Maddie told police later. "No answer. I figured she was just busy. But something felt wrong. At 6:45 p.m., Maddie walked to Claire's flat, her sneakers scuffing against fallen maple leaves. The front door was locked. The curtains were drawn. Her car, a dented gray Toyota Corolla, was still in the lot. Maddie knocked, then banged. No answer. She borrowed the spare key from the library custodian and let herself in. Inside, the apartment was quiet, clean. The kettle on the stove was cold. Claire's phone sat on the nightstand, still plugged in, showing 6 missed calls from Maddie and 1 from a number marked unknown. But it was what Maddie found in the back room that stopped her cold. Claire's studio was a converted sunroom, with tarps stapled to the windows and easels scattered like totems. Her signature turpentine and lavender scent hung in the air. The last canvas, her final piece, still sat on the easel. It was unfinished. A tall figure stood in the foreground, back turned, painted in streaks of gray and deep crimson. But it wasn't the brushwork that haunted Maddie. It was the palette knife marks, jagged and furious, scratched into the bottom right of the canvas. A single word: run. Detective Eli Price got the call just after 8 p.m. He arrived at the apartment with a steaming paper cup of diner coffee and the quiet exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many things he couldn't forget. Price wasn't from Ashbury Hollow. He'd transferred from NYPD homicide 2 years ago, after his marriage fell apart and the city started feeling like a loaded gun pressed against his ribs. Claire's case stirred something in him. He didn't know why, not yet. "It doesn't look like she packed a bag," he muttered, inspecting the bedroom. "Laptop's missing. Wallet and ID are still here. So's her toothbrush. What's the word for that?" Maddie stood in the hallway, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Impulse." No, Price's eyes moved slowly. "It means she didn't plan to leave. Whatever happened, it was fast." He found something odd in the trash. A torn envelope addressed to Claire, but the return label had been burned away. A few words of the letter were salvageable. "Tired of your silence. You said you'd stop painting them. You lied." By morning, Ashbury Hollow was swarming with state police and news vans. The town's calm, so carefully maintained, began to erode. Flyers went up. A reward fund was started. And online, things got stranger. A Reddit thread titled #WhoTookClaire gained traction. Users speculated about an obsessed fan, a stalker, even a cult. But buried in the middle of the thread was a comment that Detective Price flagged immediately. Check the eyes in her paintings. They're not blank. They're covered. That comment had been posted from an anonymous account. The IP was traced to a coffee shop, 3 blocks from Claire's apartment. Price returned to Claire's studio with Maddie the next evening. He examined the paintings one by one, carefully, methodically. It wasn't until he reached the 5th canvas that he noticed it. The texture around the eyes had been layered over, thick with oil and gesso. He peeled it back gently with a plastic tool. Beneath the paint, 2 small human eyes stared back. Photographs. Claire had pasted photographs of real eyes beneath the painted masks, like souls trying to claw their way out of their frames. Maddie recoiled. That's not her style, she said quietly. No, Price agreed. It's someone else's. He took the photo samples for fingerprinting. What the lab found chilled him. One partial print didn't belong to Claire. It belonged to a man named Sebastian Markel, a name Alan Price knew all too well, because Sebastian Markel had once been accused, though never convicted, of abducting and murdering 2 women in Brooklyn in 2016. The cases had gone cold, just like Claire's apartment. Detective Alan Price stared at the name on the fingerprint report like it was a ghost clawing up from a grave. Sebastian Markel. A name he hadn't heard in over 6 years. A name that had followed him out of New York like a curse stitched into the back of his coat. Markel had been a suspect in 2 disappearances. Irene Calda in Williamsburg and Shannon Wu in Crown Heights. Both young women. Both artists. Both gone without a trace. No bodies. No witnesses. Only a few photographs. Markel had taken eerie portraits where the subjects looked faded. Their expressions blank. Unsettling. Like they knew. Price had chased him for months. But Markel was clever. Obsessively neat. One of those psychopaths who knew exactly how far the law could stretch before it snapped. In the end, they had nothing to hold him on. And then he vanished. Until now. Price sat at his desk in the Ashbury Hollow precinct, pulling every file he could find on Markel. But the trail was ice cold. No active residents. No credit activity. No confirmed sightings since 2017. Until that smudged fingerprint showed up beneath Claire Whitmore's painting. So where've you been hiding, you son of a bitch? He muttered, lighting a cigarette he wasn't supposed to smoke inside. He dug deeper. If Claire knew Markel, there had to be a connection. Somewhere. It came 2 hours later, buried in a forgotten comment on one of Claire's old art blog posts from 2021. The username was S_M_47. The comment read, "You're getting closer to the truth. Paint what you saw, even if it hurts." Price cross-referenced the IP. The signal came from a Wi-Fi network registered to a private co-working studio in Brooklyn, a building that had once housed Sebastian Markel's photography space. Claire had been in contact with him, voluntarily. Price returned to Maddie's place that evening, a modest ranch house near the edge of town. "I need to ask again," he said as she let him in. "Are you sure Claire never mentioned Markel?" Maddie hesitated. Just a flicker, like something brushing across her face. "No," she said slowly. "I don't think so. Should she have? She might have been communicating with him, online, maybe even collaborating." "She wouldn't," Maddie said firmly. She was terrified of men who tried to control her work. She hated being told what to paint. Price noticed Maddie's hands were trembling slightly. He decided to push. There was a letter in her trash, half-burned. Someone was threatening her. Any idea who might have sent it? She shook her head. "She didn't tell me about it." He waited, then asked, "Did you ever pose for Claire?" She blinked. "What? Model for her paintings. Did she ever paint you?" Maddie looked uncomfortable. "A couple of times." "Why?" Price pulled out a printed image from one of Claire's canvases. He pointed at a face in the background, half hidden behind another figure, eyes scraped out. Maddie stared at it for a long time. "That's me," she whispered. That night, Price reviewed the tape again. The one from the mini-DV left on the precinct steps. In it, Claire sat duct-taped to a chair. The basement was windowless, stone-walled, damp. She was crying, but silent. Then came the voice. Calm. Cold. "Tell them the truth." Claire shook her head violently. "They'll kill Maddie. I can't." Then static. It was that name again. Maddie. Was Claire trying to protect her? Or warn us about her? Price leaned back in his chair. Something wasn't adding up. The clean apartment. The missing laptop. The painting signed with Run. The photographs hidden beneath the canvas. And the fingerprint. Price no longer believed Claire had just disappeared. He believed she had been taken. But now he also had to ask. Had someone helped Markel get to her? 3 days later, another delivery arrived at the precinct. No return address. Wrapped in butcher paper. Inside a new painting. Claire's signature in the corner. The canvas showed a distorted room. A woman sat in a chair, her mouth frozen mid-scream, eyes sewn shut with black thread. The background was nearly pitch black, save for one detail. A man in the shadows holding a camera. And on the chair's armrest, in small red print, "I'm still alive." The painting was real. Fresh oils. Signature verified. But it wasn't just a message. It was a map. Detective Price saw it in the shadows first. What looked like smears of black paint in the top left corner of the canvas weren't random. Under magnification, he recognized them. Numbers. Barely visible. 43.7249 degrees north. 74.0008 degrees west. A set of GPS coordinates. Price stared at them for a long time. The location was rural. Deep in the southern Adirondacks. State forest land. Largely undeveloped. Dotted with abandoned ranger stations and old hunting cabins. The kind of place you could hide someone and never be found. Claire was sending him breadcrumbs. But how? He didn't tell anyone about the coordinates. Not yet. Too risky. If someone on the inside was compromised, it could tip Markel off or whoever else was helping him. So Price left before dawn. No backup. Just a Glock, a flashlight, and a printed version of the map. The roads grew worse the deeper he drove. Pitted gravel tracks eaten away by time and weather. Eventually, the forest grew too thick, and the car could go no farther. He hiked the rest of the way in. By midday, he found the cabin. It was old, maybe 1950s. Caved-in porch. A rusted propane tank out back. No tire tracks. No electricity lines. No cell service. But the front door was bolted shut from the outside. Price unholstered his weapon. He circled around to a side window and saw something that stopped his heart. Painting. On the far wall, lit by shafts of sunlight slashing through the roof. Another of Claire's works. This one featured a screaming mouth with hands clawing at the canvas edges, as if trying to escape the frame itself. Beneath it, a small red arrow painted directly on the wooden wall. It pointed to the floorboards. Price kicked them in. Beneath the rotted boards, he found a hatch. And under that, a narrow tunnel, stone-lined, descending into blackness. The air was cold and damp. The smell of mildew and something else. Something coppery. Blood. He moved slowly, flashlight sweeping across the narrow corridor. The tunnel stretched maybe 20 feet and opened into a chamber no larger than a garden shed. Chains hung from the walls. A stained mattress lay in the corner. And painted across the ceiling, in giant dripping letters, "They don't see me if I don't blink." He wasn't alone. Something moved behind him. He spun. Empty. But something was there. Presence. The prickling sensation along his neck. He backed out slowly, gun raised. Just as he stepped outside, he heard the faintest sound. A camera shutter. Click. He turned. Nothing but trees. But when he reached his car, there was a photo wedged beneath the wiper. Black and white. A picture of him standing in front of the cabin, arms raised, gun drawn. Taken less than 5 minutes ago. Back in Ashbury Hollow, Price reviewed every detail of the cabin. Sent teams up. No trace of Claire. But in the photos he'd taken of the art inside, he noticed something else. In one of the paintings, nestled within the folds of a black dress worn by the central figure, was a name. Ashley. He ran the name alongside Sebastian Markel's records. And then the pieces clicked. Ashley Connors. Age 24. Last seen in 2015. An art student. One of Markel's earliest known models. And his first alleged victim. Her case had been closed. Declared a runaway. But now Price believed something far worse. Markel wasn't just abducting these women. He was using them. Collaborating. Twisting their art into messages. Warnings. Confessions. Maybe even giving them the illusion they were creating freely, until he took control. Which meant if Claire was still painting, she might still be alive. But not for long. Back at the precinct, Price found Maddie Cross waiting in the hallway. Pale. Shaking. "I need to talk to you," she said. Privately. They sat in interview room 2. He waited. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then she opened her purse and slid something across the table. A memory card. "She gave it to me 3 days before she disappeared," Maddie whispered. "Told me not to watch it unless something happened to her." "Why didn't you come forward?" he asked. "I was scared." "Of who?" Maddie looked up, eyes full of tears. "Of myself," she said. "Because I introduced her to him." The video on the memory card was grainy, low light. Claire was holding the camera. "I don't know how to explain it," she whispered. "It started with messages. Then came the photos. Then the man in the black coat. He said he saw something in me, that I painted fear honestly." She turned the camera on herself. Her face was pale, lips cracked. "But it's not just him. It's who he's working with. There's a name, something called the Blink Collective. I think it's real. I think it's bigger than him. And I think they're watching me now." She paused. "If I disappear, don't look for me. You'll vanish too." Then the screen cut to black. And the last thing Price heard before the video ended was the faint, familiar sound of a shutter clicking. Detective Price didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment, curtains drawn, memory card in hand, phone powered off. The name echoed in his head like a gunshot in a tunnel. The Blink Collective. He'd never heard it before. No records. No law enforcement mentions. Nothing in art circles. But it had the feel of something buried deliberately. He dug anyway. And somewhere, past forums and onion links, encrypted archives, and a forgotten .onion directory on the dark web, he found it. A folder titled Don't Blink. Inside, thousands of images. Art. Photographs. All in black and white. All anonymous. Each bore a single word caption. Consent. Obsession. Obedience. Erasure. And in one corner, buried in a subfolder labeled Ashbury, he found something else. A live feed. The camera was pointed at a small, windowless room. No sound. Just flickering fluorescent light. Claire was there. Alive. Eyes swollen. Sitting motionless. Arms bound in front of her. A single canvas on the wall behind her, half finished. Her hand was moving slowly, painting something out of frame. Price felt a pulse of hope and terror. Whoever ran this stream was still watching her. And now they knew he was watching too. He yanked the internet connection and made a secure copy. Then he called in the one person he trusted. Alyssa Vaughn, Cybercrimes Unit, ex-FBI. She owed Price a favor from a shared case involving a trafficking ring in Albany. She came down that morning, saw the footage and went pale. "This is bigger than anything I've seen," she said. "This collective, it's not just art. It's performance. Ritual. People are paying to watch." "Watch what?" "The descent." Alyssa pointed at the rotating number in the bottom corner of the feed. $73,000. Live bidding for what happens next. Meanwhile, Maddie Cross had vanished. No note, no signs of forced entry. Her car still in the driveway. But inside her bedroom, taped to the mirror, was a Polaroid of Claire. Eyes wide, a single word written beneath it in red ink. Liar. That same night, the precinct received a new package. This time, it wasn't a painting. It was a canvas bag. Inside, a severed human ear. A handful of paintbrushes dipped in blood. A voice recorder. Price pressed play. She lied to you. They always do. The canvas doesn't scream until it's primed. Then static. Then Claire's voice. Faint, distant. I tried to warn you, Maddie. You didn't listen. The recording ended. Price dropped the device like it was venomous. They weren't just taunting him anymore. They were building to something. Climax. Alyssa tracked the video stream to a relay hub bouncing through servers in Prague, then St. Petersburg, then Vancouver. But one IP briefly flickered, just long enough to pinpoint a source. Ashbury Hollow Public Library. Price drove there himself. The librarian was a rail-thin man in his 50s. Nervous. Eyes darting too much. When confronted, he broke within 10 minutes. I don't know their names, he said. They use the old archive room. Night. Every week. Who? The collective. Or at least the ones here. He handed over a list of usernames from the system log. One of them stood out immediately. M_cross94. Maddie. Price found her that night in an abandoned farmhouse off County Route 7. Bound. Blindfolded. Alive. She had been drugged, fentanyl and ketamine, but she came to long enough to speak. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought it was just art. Just immersion. Maddie, what is the Blink Collective? Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. They're not just watching, she said. They believe in it. That if you stare at something long enough without blinking, it shows you what's really there. And what's there? Price asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Nothing human. They moved Maddie to protective custody. But it was too late. Because the next morning, Alyssa woke up to find her laptop wiped. The feed was gone. The backup too. The last frame captured before the stream vanished showed Claire's room. Empty. No canvas. No Claire. Just a smear of red across the lens and a message painted directly onto the wall. She blinked. The case was now federal. But the deeper they dug, the more vanished. Witnesses disappeared. Files corrupted. And every time Price looked in the mirror, he began to see something just behind his reflection. A flicker. A shape. Eyes. Watching. The agents called it a dead case. Too many missing links. No hard leads. No Claire. But Price couldn't let it go. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he'd begun to dream. Because every night, he saw the same thing now. Claire's eyes, wide and unblinking, staring at him from the shadows. Behind her, a room without doors. Behind that, something shifting, wet and black, crawling through the folds of a canvas too large for any wall. He went back to the farmhouse where they found Maddie. Alone. The boards creaked beneath his boots. Something about the place itched beneath his skin. Like he was being pulled. He stepped into the basement. Empty. Then he saw it. Scratched into the floorboards in small, frantic letters. One more painting. It's never complete until the final frame. She's waiting in the gallery. The gallery. Price had heard whispers of it in the collective's chat archives. Rumors of a private, invitation-only exhibit held once a year. No location. No guest list. No survivors, only rumors of minds broken by what they saw. Then Alyssa called. I found it, she said. Well, part of it. There's an encrypted invite buried in the metadata of Claire's earliest paintings. Ones from before she even met Markel. She sent him the code. The blink is the door. It was the password. The gallery wasn't in Prague. Or London. Or Berlin. It was beneath Ashbury Hollow. Literally. Underneath the ruins of the original Ashbury Mental Sanatorium, closed since 1962 after a fire gutted most of the East Wing. Locals said the tunnels were sealed decades ago. They weren't. Price found the entrance hidden behind a gravestone in the old church cemetery. A rusted stairwell beneath a false crypt. The descent took 20 minutes. By the time he reached the bottom, his flashlight flickered once, then died. But the torches were already lit, and someone had been expecting him. The walls pulsed with color. Not paint, something thicker, darker, alive. Every frame held a different Claire. Claire screaming. Claire stitched to a canvas. Claire blindfolded, her hands dipped in crimson. In one painting, her mouth was sewn shut with piano wire. In another, her eyes had been gouged out and replaced with mirrored glass. The room hummed with breath. And in the center, tied to an easel like a crucifix, was the final painting. Claire, still alive, eyes wide, lips trembling. Her hand was twitching around a brush, smearing the last strokes onto a canvas as large as a door. Her skin was pale, veins blue, like she'd become part of the paint itself. Behind her stood him, Sebastian Markel, older, changed, his face gaunt, stretched, his eyes gone entirely black. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Price raised his gun. "Let her go." Markel smiled. "She is the painting. She always was." And then Claire blinked. Just once. And everything collapsed. The light turned to black. The gallery exploded into motion. Paintings howling, figures crawling from frames. A man with no face. A child with a stitched mouth. Dozens of women screaming silently from the walls, their hands pounding the glass. Markel melted into shadow, and Claire's eyes rolled back into her head. The canvas before her began to weep. Real tears. Then blood. Then nothing. When Price woke up, it was daylight. He was outside the crypt, covered in ash. No sign of the gallery. No sign of Claire. No evidence. Nothing but a smear of paint on his palms. Red. And a note folded in his coat pocket. It read, "Thank you for looking, but you should have never stared so long. C.W." A week later, an exhibit opened in Berlin. Anonymous artist. Invitation only. Critics called it transcendent, terrifying, a visual prayer to madness. One painting stood out. A woman, bound to a chair, staring wide-eyed through the canvas. Behind her, just barely visible, stood a man with a badge. His eyes were blank, and he was smiling. Detective Price resigned. He moved to the coast, changed his name, cut all ties, but every few months a package still arrives. No return address, always the same contents, a black and white photo, painting, a woman's face, and underneath in blood-red ink, "Still watching."